During the wedding toasts, my mom grabbed the microphone and said, "This marriage can wait until one thing is settled. The house goes to your sister." My husband stood up calmly and said, "Then everyone should see this." When the video appeared on the screen, the room froze. My name is Lorraine. And I need to warn you right now. What happened at my wedding reception is the kind of thing that makes people put down their champagne glasses and go completely silent. 140 guests. Flowers everywhere. A DJ who did not get paid enough for what he witnessed that night. But to understand what happened, you need to understand where I came from first. Do you know that feeling when something has been wrong for so long that wrong starts to feel normal? That was my entire childhood. I grew up outside Columbus, Ohio. My parents, Helen and Doug, had 2 daughters. Me, Lorraine, the older one, and my sister Brianna, 3 years younger. And from the time Brianna could walk, the difference in how my mother treated us was impossible to miss. When Brianna cried, Mom ran. When I cried, I was being dramatic. When Brianna got a B, it went on the fridge. When I got an A, my mother asked why it wasn't an A+. I'm not exaggerating. I remember standing in that kitchen at 11 years old, holding a test with a 96 on it, and my mother saying, "Your sister would have tried harder." Brianna was 8 and still working on multiplication. Does that sound normal to you? Because I lived it so long, I actually thought maybe it was. My dad, Doug, was a decent man with a serious conflict avoidance problem. He'd smile uncomfortably when my mother said something cutting, then quietly leave the room. He chose peace over fairness every single time. And when you're the kid being treated unfairly, that kind of peace feels a lot like betrayal. The one person who always saw it clearly was my grandmother, Grandma Ruth. She lived 40 minutes away, and every visit felt like coming up for air. She used to hold my face and say, "Lorraine, you are not what your mother makes you feel like." I held on to those words for years. I left for Ohio State, which my mother called a waste since Brianna would probably get into somewhere better. Brianna enrolled in community college. I say that with zero judgment, but the point stands. After college, I built my own life. And eventually I met Marcus. Marcus Torres was steady, funny in that quiet way, and completely unintimidated by my family's chaos. His people, his mom Patricia, his dad Gerald, were warm in a way that almost made me uncomfortable because I wasn't used to it. Being around them felt like drinking water after years of not realizing how thirsty I was. We dated 2 years. He proposed in our kitchen over cold takeout. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Was I naive to hope my mother would just be happy for me? Probably. But hope shows up even when the evidence is stacked against it. The engagement was exhausting. My mother had opinions about everything, and Brianna's name was somehow always in the middle of it. Brianna thinks the flowers should be white. Brianna said the venue is too far. At one point she actually said Brianna should be more involved in the wedding planning so she could learn for her own someday. Smiled. He nodded. I vented to Marcus every night. Now, here's the thing you need to know about my parents' house. Nothing flashy, but a solid 4-bedroom in a good neighborhood. Bought in 1991. It had always been the unspoken understanding that when the time came, that house would go to both of us equally. Nobody signed anything. Nobody said it out loud formally. But it was understood. What I didn't know was that my mother had been quietly working to change that. And what I also didn't know was that Marcus had found out, and had been documenting everything. On the morning of my wedding, I was just trying to keep my eyeliner from running before the ceremony. I had absolutely no idea the biggest moment of that day wasn't going to be the vows. Stick around. Because what my mother did at that reception, she really thought she was going to get away with it. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Marcus cried a little when I walked down the aisle, just enough to be sweet. His best man Darnell handed him a handkerchief and whispered something that made him laugh mid-tear. It was perfect. My mother sat in the front row looking like she was attending a funeral she hadn't approved of. But that was just normal Helen behavior. I made my peace with it. The reception was at a venue outside Columbus. String lights, round tables, a dance floor that actually got used. Marcus's family filled one entire side of the room with noise and laughter. My side was quieter, more polite, more tense. Grandma Ruth was near the front in a lavender dress. She squeezed my hand as I passed and whispered, "You look like exactly who you were always supposed to be." I nearly lost it right there. Dinner went smoothly. For about 90 minutes, I actually relaxed. Then the toasts began. Gerald went first, warm, funny, a little long. Marcus's sister Renee made half the room cry. Darnell roasted Marcus perfectly. Then my mother stood up. The plan was simple. Short toast, sit down. That was it. I had kept it simple specifically because I knew my mother. She took the microphone, smiled at the room and said, "This marriage can wait until one thing is settled. The house goes to your sister." I felt the blood leave my face. The room didn't gasp. It did something worse. It went completely silent. Patricia set down her wine glass very slowly. Grandma Ruth's expression shifted from warm to lethal in about half a second. My sister Brianna stared at the tablecloth like she wanted to disappear into it. And me. I just sat there, frozen. 31 years of don't make a scene conditioning hit me all at once. What would you have done in that moment? 'Cause honestly my brain just stopped. Then Marcus stood up. He buttoned his jacket calmly and said, "Then everyone should see this." He nodded to his friend Terrence at the AV booth. Within seconds the screen behind the DJ lit up. What appeared on that screen was documentation, bank statements, a notarized letter, and a recording. 3 months before our wedding, my mother had visited an attorney and begun transferring full ownership of my parents' house, entirely into Brianna's name. Not split equally. Entirely Brianna's. Without telling me. And, as the recording made clear, while actively lying to my father about the paperwork she'd had him sign. My dad Doug was sitting 4 seats away from her. I watched his face change as that information filled the screen. That expression. I will never forget it. Grandma Ruth stood up, smoothed her lavender dress, and said at a perfectly audible volume, "Well, there it is." My mother still had the microphone. She looked at my father's face, at Brianna's horror, at 140 silent people. And for the first time in my entire life, I watched Helen completely run out of things to say. Did I feel victorious? No. I felt sick and hollowed out in that way you get when something you half suspected becomes something you fully know. But Marcus was still standing. And he wasn't finished. What my father did next, I'll tell you very soon. And you are genuinely not going to see it coming. My father is not a dramatic man. I already told you that. Doug is the guy who leaves the room, who smiles uncomfortably, who finds something very important to do in the garage when tension rises. In 31 years I had never once seen him confront my mother about anything significant. So when he pushed his chair back and stood up at that table, every single person who knew him went still. He didn't take the microphone. He didn't need it. The room was so quiet his normal speaking voice carried just fine. He looked at my mother and said, "Helen, give me the microphone and sit down." Not angry, not loud, just completely, unmistakably done. My mother opened her mouth. He said it again. "Sit down." She sat down. I think I actually heard someone at the back of the room exhale. My dad turned to the guests, apologized briefly for the interruption, and then turned to Marcus and me and said something I will carry with me forever. He said, "Lorraine, I owe you an apology that is long overdue. I should have been paying closer attention to a lot of things." That was it. Simple. No speech. But coming from Doug, it was enormous. Grandma Ruth said loudly from her table and several people laughed, which broke the tension just enough for everyone to breathe again. The DJ, bless his heart, quietly started playing something soft in the background. Terrence dimmed the screen. And Marcus sat back down, took my hand under the table, and leaned over and said, "You okay?" I said, "Ask me tomorrow." Now here's where I have to be honest with you about something. In the days after the wedding, people kept telling me I must have felt so validated, so vindicated, and I understood why they said that. But the truth, I was a mess. Because that house, the paperwork, the attorney, that was real. My mother had actually done that. And my father had signed things without reading them carefully enough, which meant the process had actually moved forward. It wasn't just a threat she made at the microphone. It was already partially in motion. Does that change how you see it? Because it changed everything for me. Marcus had discovered it through his cousin Felicia, who worked in a legal office and had recognized my mother's name on some paperwork that passed through. Small world, right? He'd spent 6 weeks quietly verifying everything before he said a single word to me, and even then he only told me the full picture the night before the wedding. I had spent our entire wedding morning knowing something was coming but not knowing exactly what. Which honestly explains a lot about my eyeliner situation. The week after the wedding my father called me. He had spoken to an attorney himself, a different one, and had begun the process of reversing what my mother had started. Legally, because he hadn't fully understood what he'd signed, there was a path to undo it. It wasn't simple. It wasn't fast. But it was possible. He also told me he and my mother were sleeping in separate rooms. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me thought good. Part of me felt guilty for thinking good. You know how complicated that is. When someone finally does the right thing but it took them 30 years to get there. Do you think I should have just forgiven him right then? I genuinely don't know what the right answer is. My mother, meanwhile, was not handling any of this gracefully. She called me twice that week. The first call was defensive. I did what was best for this family. The second call was a crying one. Nobody understands the pressure I've been under. Neither call included the word sorry. Brianna called me too. And that conversation was different. She was quiet for a long time and then she said, "Lorraine, I didn't know. I need you to know I didn't know." And here's the thing, I believed her. Brianna had her own complicated relationship with our mother. Being the favorite isn't always the gift it looks like from the outside. My mother had built Brianna's entire identity around being chosen, which meant Brianna had spent her whole life terrified of losing that. That's not freedom. That's a different kind of cage. We talked for almost 2 hours that night. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in maybe 15 years. But let me tell you what I was also doing during all of this. Because I wasn't just sitting around waiting for things to resolve themselves. Marcus and I had talked and agreed. We were not going to let my mother's behavior just quietly disappear into family awkwardness the way everything always had before. Had my own plan. And it involved something my mother cared about very, very deeply. Her reputation. What I did next was either brilliant or completely petty depending on who you ask. Probably both. I'll tell you exactly what it was. And yeah, I'm aware it was a little extra. But after 31 years, I think I earned a little extra. My mother has always cared deeply about one thing above everything else. Her reputation. The neighborhood, the church group, her book club. Helen's entire identity was built around being seen as a good, devoted mother. Which made what I did next particularly satisfying. Now, do you think revenge is ever justified? 'Cause I went back and forth on this. Marcus said let the legal process handle it and move on. Grandma Ruth, when I called her, just said, "Baby, do what you need to do," and then offered me her pound cake recipe. I love that woman. My mother had hosted a monthly book club for 11 years. 8 women, rotating houses, very civilized. It was the thing she was proudest of socially. I knew one of the women personally. Sandra, who had watched me grow up and always had that quiet knowing look that told me she saw more than she said. I wrote Sandra a letter. Calm, factual, no dramatics. Just dates, documents, and exactly what my mother had done. To me and to my father. I didn't ask Sandra to do anything specific. I just let her do whatever she wanted with the information. Apparently she shared it with the group before the next dinner. My mother walked into book club that Thursday and every woman in that room already knew everything. I heard about it through my Aunt Carla, who heard it from her neighbor, who knew 2 of the women. Small towns. Apparently the evening was very quiet. Apparently my mother left early for the first time in 11 years. Did I feel guilty? Little. Then I remembered standing frozen at my own wedding reception. And the feeling passed. On the legal side, my father had hired an attorney named Mr. Whitfield. The transfer hadn't been fully completed, which worked in our favor. My father was cooperating fully, and my mother, faced with the reality that Doug wasn't backing down this time, had stopped pushing. Then about 3 weeks after the wedding, my dad asked Marcus and me to meet him for coffee. Just him. We met at a diner and he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a 4-page handwritten letter. My father is not a writer. I don't think he'd ever written me a letter in my life. But those 4 pages covered 30 years. Things he'd noticed, stayed silent about, and was ashamed of. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I cried in that diner in a way that had nothing to do with sadness. Marcus put his arm around me and said nothing, which was exactly right. Brianna had been texting me regularly. She'd even confronted my mother herself, which I genuinely didn't see coming. My mother's response was to cry and say everyone was against her. Classic Helen. But something was shifting. Slowly, reluctantly, but shifting. Then my mother called again. I almost didn't answer. When I did, she was quiet for a moment and then said, "I don't know when I started thinking it was okay to treat you the way I did. But I've been thinking about it. And I don't know how to fix it. Not a full apology. Not clean or wrapped up neatly. But it was the first time in my entire life she said anything resembling accountability. I told her I appreciated it and that I needed more time. Was that the right thing to say? I honestly still don't know. 31 years of being the less loved daughter doesn't heal in one phone call. It doesn't heal because your father writes you a letter or your mother has one uncomfortable book club evening. Heals slowly, messily, with setbacks. But what happened when we all ended up in the same room again for the first time? None of us saw it coming. And honestly, neither will you. It was Thanksgiving. Marcus and I had originally planned to spend it with his family. Patricia had already started texting me about her sweet potato recipe in October, which I found both adorable and aggressive. But about 2 weeks before the holiday, my father called and asked quietly if we would consider coming home. He didn't pressure me. He just asked. I talked it over with Marcus for 2 days. He said whatever I decided, he was with me. That's the thing about that man. He never pushes. He just stands next to you. Said yes. I won't pretend I wasn't nervous driving to that house. I'd grown up there, but walking in that Thanksgiving felt like entering completely unfamiliar territory. My stomach was in knots the entire 40-minute drive. Brianna met us at the door. She hugged me, a real hug, not the polite shoulder pat we'd done for years, and whispered, "I'm really glad you came." My mother was in the kitchen. She came out when she heard us arrive, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Not defensive, not performative, just tired. And something underneath the tired that looked almost like relief. She said, "I'm glad you're here, Lorraine." Simple, quiet, nothing dramatic. And somehow that landed harder than any big speech would have. Dinner was not a perfectly healed, made-for-TV moment. I want to be honest about that. There were awkward silences. There were moments where my mother said something and I had to take a breath before responding. There was one point where she started to make a comment about the house and my father simply said her name, just her name, Helen, and she stopped. That was new. That was very new. Grandma Ruth had joined us, lavender dress swapped for a burgundy one. At one point she leaned over to me and murmured, "Progress isn't pretty, but it's still progress." She's never wrong. After dinner, while Marcus helped my dad with dishes, those two had quietly become a unit, which made me happier than I can explain. My mother asked if I would sit with her for a minute. We sat at the kitchen table. Just the two of us. She didn't have a speech prepared. She stumbled over her words a little. But what she said was this, that she had spent so many years believing she was protecting the family by making certain decisions, and that she had somehow convinced herself that her version of fairness was actual fairness. And that sitting alone in the weeks after the wedding, she had started to understand how much damage that kind of thinking had done. She said, "I looked at you at that reception and I saw your face when I took that microphone. And I have not stopped seeing it since." I didn't cry. I had done my crying already. In diners, in my car, on the phone with Grandma Ruth at midnight. I was empty of that particular kind of tears. I just said, "I need you to keep going, Mom. Not just today. I need you to keep choosing differently." She nodded. She said she understood. Do I believe people can change? Honestly, I think some can and some can't. And I think the difference is whether they're willing to be uncomfortable long enough to actually do it. My mother was not there yet. But she was closer than she had ever been. The house situation was resolved legally about 6 weeks later. It went back to both names equally, the way it should have been from the start. My father handled it and my mother did not fight it. That, maybe more than anything she said at Thanksgiving, told me something real was shifting. Brianna called me when it was finalized. She said, "I never wanted it that way, Lorraine. I hope you know that." I told her I knew. And I meant it. So here's where I land on all of this. My wedding day was supposed to be the best day of my life. And parts of it genuinely were. Marcus crying at the altar, Darnell's toast, Grandma Ruth in her lavender dress. Those parts were everything. But the rest of it, the microphone, the screen, the frozen room, turned out to be something I didn't expect. It turned out to be the moment 31 years of quietly swallowed hurt finally had to be dealt with. By everyone. All at once. Whether they were ready or not. My mother is still a work in progress. Am I? So is our relationship. But we're talking. Really talking. And after 31 years, that is not nothing. Marcus still calls what he did at the reception just handling it. I call it the moment I understood exactly who I had married. Grandma Ruth calls it long overdue. She's still never wrong. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, if you've ever been the one who was overlooked, the one who kept the peace while quietly falling apart, I just want you to know that things can shift. Not perfectly, not on your timeline, but they can shift. I'd really love to know what you think. Drop it in the comments. Honestly, did my mother deserve what happened at that book club? Was I too hard on her, or not hard enough? And did Marcus handle that reception the right way, or should I have been the one to stand up? If this story meant something to you, a like would mean a lot to me. And if something didn't sit right with you, tell me that too. I can take it. Thank you for staying with me through all of it. Means more than you know.